Just moments ago, the royal world was shaken by an announcement no one saw coming. Sophie, Countess of Wessex, has been officially granted the late Queen's former title, a move that not only stunned royal watchers, but also sent a powerful message through the monarchy. But it's Edward's emotional statement that has everyone talking and questioning what this really means for the future of the crown. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Buckingham Palace released the statement with clinical precision, but the weight behind it was anything but ordinary. In a single moment, Sophie was elevated from supportive royal to a figure echoing the legacy of Queen Elizabeth II herself. The title, once belonging to the monarch during her formative years, carries with it a lineage of duty, restraint, and strength under pressure. It wasn't merely a ceremonial handover, it was a torch being passed. The public had no time to prepare, no whispers in the press, no speculative articles warming up the narrative. The news hit like thunder in clear skies, and within minutes, the media frenzy had ignited. Royal correspondents scrambled for context, but few could offer more than stunned speculation. Why now, and why her? Then came Edward's statement. Calm, but trembling with emotion. "She stood by my mother's values with quiet dignity," he began, his voice cracking ever so slightly. "Today, the Crown recognizes what we've always known: Sophie has earned her place in history." It wasn't just a tribute, it was a proclamation, and those words, coming from the most reserved of the Queen's children, struck a chord that rippled beyond royal tradition. For seasoned watchers of the firm, the signs were all there: coded messages hidden in the language, carefully chosen timing, a subtle but deliberate shift in royal dynamics. Edward's words weren't just about Sophie's past, they hinted at her future. Was this the beginning of a new royal power block? Was the palace preparing for a reimagined monarchy, anchored by figures who had long been overlooked? The reaction from inside the institution was immediate, but opaque. Advisors refused further comment. Royal aides were seen in back-to-back briefings, and the absence of statements from William or Camilla only intensified the speculation. Meanwhile, social media exploded with praise, nostalgia, and conspiracy alike. This wasn't just news, it was a reckoning. A reckoning that has made one thing undeniable. Something is shifting within the walls of Buckingham Palace, and Sophie Wessex is now standing in the eye of that storm. But to understand why this moment holds so much weight, we must first examine the quiet force Sophie has always been, and why the palace may have finally decided to make her impossible to ignore. For years, Sophie Wessex remained in the background, loyal, supportive, and dutiful. But behind closed doors, she was slowly building a reputation as one of the most respected voices in the firm. Now, insiders say her rise was never accidental. It was carefully orchestrated. Long before the cameras ever turned in her direction, Sophie had already made a conscious decision to serve the crown, not overshadow it. From the earliest days of her courtship with Prince Edward, she knew that visibility came with risk, so she chose subtlety, grace, patience. While others rushed toward the spotlight, Sophie made herself indispensable in the shadows. That discretion won her favor in powerful places. Queen Elizabeth II, known for her sharp intuition, reportedly saw in Sophie something rare: discipline without ego. As years passed, the Queen would draw her closer, not through grand gestures, but through trust, private audiences, shared duties, and the quiet confiding of burdens no headline ever captured. While other royals stumbled, Sophie remained untouchable, not because she was lucky, but because she was deliberate. She avoided gossip like the plague, dodged controversy with precision, and when the press did knock, she answered with grace rather than retaliation. And behind the palace gates, her voice began to matter. Courtiers noticed how her counsel steadied Edward. Staff whispered that her presence softened even the Queen's hardest days. Foreign dignitaries mentioned her fluency in diplomacy, and still, she never claimed credit. She simply showed up, quietly powerful, day after day. Those close to the late Queen now reveal something astonishing: Sophie was being groomed all along. Not to ascend a throne, but to become something arguably more influential: a bridge, a stabilizer, the quiet force that could anchor the monarchy in a new era of turbulence. Her role in delicate international visits expanded. Her invitations to private Windsor gatherings increased, and perhaps most tellingly, the Queen often chose Sophie, not senior figures, to accompany her during deeply personal engagements, those that weren't captured by the press, but mattered most to the institution. All of it, every nod of trust, every backstage responsibility, wasn't coincidence. It was preparation, a whisper campaign of confidence that now, in hindsight, reads like the prelude to a coronation of a different kind. And in the silence of that strategy, Sophie did something even more rare. She made herself invaluable without making herself a target. But as Sophie's influence quietly solidified, something else was happening in the background, an emotional storm brewing far from public view. A storm that would force her to decide whether allegiance to the crown was worth the personal cost. And while Sophie rose in silence, another drama was quietly unfolding, one that would put her loyalty to the ultimate test. He's often considered the most understated of the Queen's children. But beneath Edward's composed exterior lies a man who's carried the weight of legacy, disappointment, and duty. And his recent statement reveals a heartbreak he's hidden for years. From the very beginning, Prince Edward's journey in the royal family was marked by tension caught between expectations he never quite fit and traditions he never wanted to break. Unlike his older brothers, he wasn't the heir or the headline. He didn't chase power like Charles or stir scandal like Andrew. Instead, Edward moved quietly, almost invisibly, within a system that never fully knew what to do with him. And that ambiguity of identity, of purpose, became its own burden. For decades, the public barely noticed the toll, but those closest to him did. Friends recall moments where he would retreat during state functions, overwhelmed not by attention but by the knowledge that he didn't command it. The spotlight always belonged to someone else, even when he earned it. The press was merciless. Comparisons were constant. If Charles was the heir and Andrew the rebel, then what was Edward? A blank slate. A royal with no narrative. His early projects, including his failed television endeavours, were mocked rather than encouraged, and the humiliation didn't end there. Even when he stepped back into a full-time royal role, it often felt like he was filling in, not standing out. But behind that quiet presence was a man fiercely loyal to the one person who always believed in him, his mother, Queen Elizabeth II. Their bond, though rarely displayed, ran deep. Insiders now reveal that the Queen often leaned on Edward not for show, but for sanity. He didn't demand, he supported, and in private, she expressed a regret few ever knew, that the world never truly understood her youngest son. But perhaps the most painful moment came in the form of an unfulfilled promise, one that the Queen reportedly made in confidence to one day bestow a title that would finally reflect Edward's worth. That day never came while she lived, and that silence, despite all her love, stayed with him. His recent emotional statement, delivered not with grandeur, but with striking vulnerability, cut through the royal facade. "She saw something in Sophie that the world overlooked," he said. But those who truly listened understood the subtext. It wasn't just about Sophie. It was about him, about a man who watched the woman he loved earn the recognition he'd quietly longed for his entire life. And rather than bitterness, he chose reverence, because in Sophie's elevation, he found peace. In her triumph, he found closure. It was as if, in honouring Sophie, the monarchy had finally honoured him too. But it wasn't just Edward's grief or Sophie's grace that brought them here. It was a secret promise whispered between two women at the heart of the monarchy. Before her passing, Queen Elizabeth reportedly made a final request, a wish not written in law, but sealed in legacy. And now, that wish is being honoured in a way that's stirring both admiration and outrage across the royal sphere. Behind the grand ceremonies and carefully polished statements, a whisper had been circulating among senior staff long before the Queen's passing, an unconfirmed but persistent belief that Her Majesty had one final act left unfinished. Not a proclamation, not a declaration, but a promise. One made in hushed tones, during private meetings between Queen Elizabeth and Sophie, Countess of Wessex. Those present at Windsor during the Queen's final years recall Sophie visiting often always quietly, always respectfully. But those visits were not just social. According to insiders, they were moments of counsel, comfort, and growing trust. Palace sources now suggest that during these private talks, the Queen confided in Sophie more than any other royal at the time. What's more, she expressed a deep admiration for Sophie's ability to remain composed amid chaos. A kind of fortitude, Elizabeth reportedly said, reminded her of her younger self. And then, after the Queen's passing, something changed. Weeks after the state funeral, a handwritten note was said to have been found among the Queen's personal belongings, a letter addressed not to the nation, not to her heirs, but to Edward. In it, she reflected on her years as sovereign and offered a pointed message about legacy, character, and the burden of public life. One line stood out. Sophie has been a quiet flame in the shadow of storms. Do not let her light go unseen. When Edward read the letter, he was visibly shaken. According to a family aide, he sat in silence for nearly an hour, rereading the Queen's words again and again. And then, he reportedly made a decision, one that would change the trajectory of his wife's place in the monarchy forever. Yet the royal institution doesn't move quickly or loudly when dealing with matters of symbolism and power. The note was not released to the public. Royal aides pushed back, worried it would spark questions about succession, favoritism, or deviation from protocol. But something behind the scenes had begun. Titles were reviewed, roles were reassessed. Sophie, once seen as a secondary figure in a crowded royal landscape, was suddenly positioned with unprecedented visibility. Whether this was coincidence or coordinated action remains debated. But within weeks, it became clear the monarchy was subtly but deliberately building a path to elevate her. The Queen's private wish, though never formalized through official channels, had taken root in the corridors of power. And with it came a reverence, a near-sacred obligation to honor not just a woman, but a vision of continuity shaped by the Queen herself. But any reshuffling of power in the royal family never comes without conflict, and this time, it's Camilla who feels the ground shifting beneath her. As Sophie's star rises, Queen Camilla's inner circle is said to be bracing for a quiet war. Sources claim she views the title transfer as more than symbolic, it's a direct threat to her standing, and her response has already set off quiet alarms inside the palace. In the wake of Buckingham Palace's surprise announcement, whispers began to circulate through the marble halls of power, not of celebration, but concern. Behind the public smiles and choreographed appearances, Queen Camilla was reportedly visibly shaken, caught off guard by a development that was neither forecasted nor, in her view, sufficiently justified. According to insiders, the Queen Consort had been assured that no other royal woman would be granted a title once held by the late monarch. That assurance, now shattered, has left her questioning her place in a hierarchy she fought so long to be accepted into. Though her advisors reportedly urged restraint to remain above the fray, to not give weight to speculation, Camilla, known for her resilience and sharp instincts, did not remain idle. Subtle but calculated moves began almost immediately. A trusted aide from Sophie's communications team was quietly reassigned, raising eyebrows about the timing. An internal directive was issued to re-evaluate roles within royal patronages, some of which Sophie had recently become associated with. Though nothing was officially stated, those within the palace recognized these as classic signals, the beginning of a soft power struggle. Behind the scenes, Camilla's team allegedly began pushing back, planting cautious but cutting narratives in friendly outlets. Anonymous sources suddenly questioned whether Sophie's newfound prominence was diluting the Queen's role or confusing the public image of royal leadership. And then came the whispers stories suggesting that Sophie, once known for her discretion, was now stepping too far into the spotlight. Words like overexposed and overreaching started appearing in editorial columns, none sourced, all strategic. The tension didn't end with Camilla. Reports now suggest that Edward, typically unflappable, has grown increasingly protective of his wife. While never confrontational by nature, Those closest to him say a noticeable chill has developed between him and Camilla, one punctuated by a recent moment at a state event where the two exchanged only the briefest of acknowledgements. The warmth that once existed has cooled. And in the royal family, where every glance and gesture carries meaning, that frost speaks volumes. As palace insiders scramble to maintain order and continuity, they face a challenge they didn't anticipate. Sophie's quiet rise is no longer just a personal evolution. It's becoming a movement. And as the crown attempts to control the narrative, it's quickly realizing the real story is already being written elsewhere. And while tension brews behind palace walls, the public has already taken sides, turning Sophie into something the monarchy wasn't prepared for, a symbol of what the crown could be. In a time when the monarchy faces unprecedented scrutiny, Sophie's story has struck a chord with the public. But what is it about this quiet royal that's capturing hearts across generations, and what does it mean for the crown's survival? In the hours following the title announcement, something extraordinary began to unfold not inside the walls of Buckingham Palace, but in the digital town squares of the public. Social media erupted with praise. Hashtags honoring Sophie trended globally, and comparisons to Diana, Princess of Wales, surged like wildfire. But this wasn't nostalgia, it was recognition. Recognition of a woman who had never sought attention, yet had earned admiration through grace, resilience, and quiet impact. Thousands shared clips of her past engagements, visiting survivors, comforting grieving families, standing silently in service while others posed. In a monarchy too often marked by scandal and spectacle, Sophie had become a symbol of substance. Humanitarian groups she had quietly supported for decades suddenly saw an influx of donations. Stories resurfaced of her frontline visits during times of crisis, not as orchestrated PR moments, but as genuine acts of compassion. The public wasn't just celebrating a title change, they were rallying behind an image of royalty that felt authentic and trustworthy. Her style of parenting, her refusal to chase headlines, her grounded presence, all stood in contrast to the turmoil that had plagued other branches of the firm. And the message was clear. This was the kind of royal the people wanted. Even more striking were the public moments that followed. When Sophie and Edward appeared at a charity event days later, they were met not with polite applause, but with standing ovations, rare, unscripted, and emotional. Young women held up signs calling Sophie a new kind of queen. Elderly royalists wept, saying she reminded them of the early days of Elizabeth II. For a family desperate to regain public confidence, this was not just goodwill, it was gold. Commentators, once dismissive of Sophie's low-key role, began issuing mea culpas. Headlines read, "The future of the monarchy might be a countess, and why Sophie Wessex could save the crown." This wasn't mere flattery. It was strategy. In a monarchy struggling to define its future, Sophie had emerged as an anchor. And for many, Edward, standing beside her, quietly supportive, visibly moved, offered a glimpse of what royal unity could look like. Not performative, not political, but real. Yet with this rising wave of admiration came a deeper unease inside the palace. Because the louder the public's love for Sophie grew, the more it risked upsetting the delicate balance of power behind the scenes. The royal family has always depended on control of image, of narrative, of hierarchy. But in this moment, that control was slipping. But behind this wave of admiration lies a dangerous truth. The more the public embraces Sophie, the more fragile the firm's internal balance becomes. The palace may present a united front, but insiders are whispering about a brewing divide. The Queen's former title was never meant to be passed lightly, and for some royals, this decision feels like betrayal wrapped in tradition. Behind the majestic facade, fault lines are forming. The announcement that Sophie would receive the Queen's former title didn't just ripple across the public, it struck at the very core of the royal family's internal dynamics. Sources close to the firm speak of a sudden tension between Prince William and Prince Edward, not born of personal animosity, but of timing, perception, and unspoken expectations. William, destined to inherit the crown, reportedly felt blindsided by the swiftness of the move. Insiders suggest he wasn't consulted, only informed. And for a future king used to strategy and structure, that lack of forewarning was seen as both reckless and disrespectful. Princess Anne, too, is said to be torn. As the most seasoned working royal, her sense of duty runs deeper than most. Privately, those close to her say she believes Sophie deserves recognition, but publicly, she's remained tight-lipped. The optics of a title so steeped in Elizabeth II's legacy being given away so soon, without wider family discussion, are weighing heavily. Especially as Anne herself has long served without demanding reward or spotlight. Her silence isn't apathy, it's discontent, masked as diplomacy. Palace staff, caught in the middle of this silent war, are feeling the pressure. Reports of departments being instructed to watch their words, of aides quietly reassigned, and even of old rivalries being reignited behind closed doors, have all begun to surface. One source described a private family meeting held days after the announcement as emotionally explosive, a rare break from royal stoicism that reportedly ended with Edward storming out and William refusing to shake his hand. And then there's King Charles. His silence is loud. While he has made no official statement, whispers suggest he quietly supports Edward, seeing in his brother a kindred spirit long overshadowed. In private, he is said to have praised Sophie's unwavering loyalty to the firm and acknowledged the Queen's own affection for her. But Charles knows better than anyone how fragile the family's image is. His endorsement remains in the shadows, strategic, careful, and unrecorded. The media, of course, has smelled blood. Leaks, anonymous quotes, and insider briefings have turned the Sophie title transfer into the story of the year. Every raised eyebrow, every shifted schedule, every frosty exchange is now interpreted as part of a larger rift. And the palace, usually so adept at controlling narrative, finds itself struggling to maintain cohesion. What was meant to be a moment of unity now threatens to expose long-festering divisions. And while chaos simmers within, Sophie's quiet strength begins to reshape the crown from the outside, culminating in a moment that no one will soon forget. At a public ceremony meant to honour the Queen's legacy, Edward took the podium. What followed wasn't just a tribute, it was a cathartic release, years in the making, and for those watching, it felt like the final word in a battle long fought in silence. As Edward stood before the crowd, there was an unmistakable tremble in his voice, subtle at first, but undeniable. This was not the carefully polished prince the public had grown used to. This was a man speaking from a place of unfiltered emotion. For years, he had watched from the sidelines as his siblings took center stage, as headlines swirled around scandal, as tradition and turmoil collided again and again. But now, in front of dignitaries, family, and the world, Edward stepped out of the shadow, not to speak of himself, but of the two women who defined his path, his mother and his wife. He began by recounting private moments with the Queen, soft memories of quiet counsel and unwavering grace. But it was when he turned to Sophie that his voice caught. Cameras captured it, an audible choke, a brief pause as he looked down to gather himself. Then came the words that would echo across the monarchy. "You saw her, Mum, when no one else did. It wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't staged, it was raw, and that made it unforgettable." The audience, normally stoic at such events, was visibly moved. Several were seen wiping away tears. Others nodded silently, as if finally witnessing a truth that had gone unspoken for far too long. Edward continued, his voice steadier now, speaking of Sophie's strength during the monarchy's darkest hours, of how she endured criticism with silence, held the family together during storms, and never asked for recognition. He spoke of her as a pillar, as the person his mother trusted, as someone who, when the crown needed stability, simply showed up again and again. And then he said something that changed how the public saw him. "All this time, she wasn't just my strength, she was yours too. And we all missed it. Until now." Sophie, seated in the front row, didn't blink away her tears. She let them fall, not in sorrow, but in release. For her, this wasn't just validation, it was liberation. After years of quiet service, she was no longer the invisible royal. She was, for the first time, acknowledged not just by the institution, but by the man who knew better than anyone what it had cost her. In the hours that followed, royal commentators described the speech as a defining moment. Headlines praised Edward's vulnerability, calling it a new chapter for the royal image. Social media erupted with support, dubbing the couple the soul of the modern monarchy. But perhaps the most striking shift was in Edward himself. For once, he was no longer simply the Queen's youngest son. He was a man who had finally found his voice and used it to honor the two people who mattered most. But even as Edward finds his voice and Sophie claims her place, one question still looms. What will this mean for the monarchy moving forward? The dust may have settled for now, but the impact of this title transfer is just beginning. And as the palace recalibrates, a quiet transformation is underway. Sophie Wessex may have inherited more than just a name, she may have inherited the future. Across Britain and beyond, the reaction has revealed a deeper truth about the monarchy's moment of reckoning. Public sentiment is shifting, not towards spectacle, but towards substance. Viewers who once watched royal drama with detached fascination are now searching for something steadier, something real. Sophie's ascent has tapped into that longing. She represents a version of royalty that listens before it speaks, serves before it claims, and endures before it is applauded. In a time of constant crisis, that calm has become magnetic. The crown, once defined by hierarchy alone, is being reimagined through empathy and credibility. With that reimagining comes pressure. The monarchy can no longer rely on tradition as insulation. Expectations are changing, and rapidly. Transparency, emotional intelligence, and visible service are no longer optional, they are demanded. Sophie's rise is increasingly viewed not as an isolated honor, but as part of a broader generational handover already underway. A handover not written into law, but etched into public trust. The symbolism matters. It suggests a monarchy willing to evolve from within, guided by those who have earned respect quietly rather than seized it loudly. In this shifting narrative, the spotlight has subtly moved. King Charles remains central, yet the public conversation no longer orbits him with the same intensity. Attention has drifted toward those who stabilize rather than dominate. Questions swirl about the long-term influence of Queen Camilla, about whether authority can coexist with affection in the modern royal image. None of this is said outright, but it's felt in the tone of commentary, in the framing of headlines, in the pauses between official statements. And at the heart of it all stand Edward and Sophie, newly perceived as anchors rather than afterthoughts. Together, they embody continuity without rigidity, loyalty without silence, dignity without distance. They are not demanding a future, they are being entrusted with it. That distinction matters. It suggests that the monarchy's survival may depend less on inheritance and more on integrity, less on who is next and more on who is ready. Still, uncertainty lingers. Institutions this old do not change without resistance, and every step forward invites scrutiny from within. The question is no longer whether Sophie belongs in this moment, but whether the monarchy can keep pace with the expectations she now carries. The answer will unfold slowly, in choices made quietly, and in silences that speak volumes. As the crown evolves in real time, one truth remains. Sometimes the quietest royals leave the loudest legacy, and for Sophie Wessex, her legacy has just begun. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.